10 Typewriter Tales, a collection of stories, written by Thomas Fincham, narrated by John William Cantiz. Empire of Flies. "Henry, wake up," said a loud voice. He tried to ignore it, like always, putting a pillow over his head. "Henry, get up. You're going to be late for work," said the voice again. The voice was his mother's, and it was coming from downstairs. Henry Watman got up. He had a headache. He knew he couldn't go on much more like this. This had to be his last day, he told himself. He had to finish it, or every day he would wake up with little sleep and a headache the size of a melon. Drowsily, he made his way to the bathroom. He splashed cold water over his face, but that didn't help. His eyes closed, and his head dropped into the sink. With all his might, he turned the tap and let the cold water fall on his head. Great, he thought. My hair was already wet. No need to take a shower. He dried his hair, got dressed, and went down to the kitchen. His mom was working at the stove, making his usual breakfast. Scrambled eggs, which he always had with toast, and a glass of orange juice. He flopped onto the chair, and his mom placed his breakfast in front of him. "Don't you get tired of the same stuff every morning?" she asked. "Today will be the last day. Starting tomorrow, I'm going to eat something different," he replied. "What's today? Something special?" He didn't answer. He began devouring his breakfast, which he had begun to dislike, but he couldn't break his routine, at least not today. His mom, realizing she wasn't going to get an answer, said, "Elizabeth called this morning." Henry wasn't interested. He knew what she was going to say. They're hiring people at her firm, and they need someone who can write and type reports. "I don't want to write or type reports," Henry shot back. "Why not?" his mom asked, irritated. "It's boring." "And working for a bookstore isn't?" she said. "That's not fair, Mom," he said, getting up. "I'm sorry, honey." Her voice was calm and gentle. "I don't want you to waste your talent, that's all." "I know," he said and kissed her on the cheek. "I'll see you later." Outside, he took a deep breath. He hated being like that to her. He knew she wanted the best for him. She always did. But today would be the last day. Tomorrow he would be a different man. Tomorrow he would tell her the truth. Henry took the nearest bus to the book palace. "Henry, you're late again," the owner said. The owner was a strict but fair man. "This is the second time this week." "I know. Tomorrow I'll be on time." The owner shook his head, knowing Henry would never change. Henry began putting the displays out in front of the shop. Bestsellers from Michael Crichton, John Grisham, and Danielle Steele were placed outside, along with a relative unknown H.W. Greaves. Greaves's first novel, The Empire of Flies, had become an instant bestseller. It was already in its third printing. It was the hottest book of the year, so hot that Book Palace was running out of copies. "Did we order more copies of The Empire of Flies?" Henry asked as he went back in. "Yes, last night," the owner replied. "When can we expect them?" "Sometime this afternoon." The rest of the morning, Henry went about doing his duties, cleaning, organizing, assembling displays for upcoming books. "I'll be back in 5 minutes," the owner yelled as he left, indicating that Henry should take over the shop. Through the shop's window, Henry saw Mrs. Tanner pick something up from one of the displays. He ignored her and tried to continue with his tasks, but he couldn't help it. He peeked again to see what she was picking up. Mrs. Tanner was a frequent customer. Her husband had died the previous year. He was a wealthy real estate builder who had left her with quite a fortune. Now, in her retirement years, Mrs. Tanner found books to keep her company. She entered holding 4 copies of The Empire of Flies. "Mrs. Tanner, didn't you buy several copies last week?" Henry asked as she made her way to him. "I can't get enough of it," she said, with a bright smile. He scanned the books. "Who are these for?" "One is for my sister-in-law, and the other's for my partners in my bridge club," she said. "Don't you have any more copies?" "Sorry, all out. Hope to get a shipment later today." "This book is selling out fast," she said. "It is. We can't seem to keep enough of it. Do you know if and when the author is coming down to our city for a book signing? I would love to meet him." "I doubt that," Henry said. "I read somewhere that's not his or her real name. It's a pseudonym." Are you serious? Yes, Henry said, placing the books in a clear plastic bag. I read that when the novel won the Booker Prize, the author didn't show up. That's a shame. Everyone would want to meet him. I know I would. I guess we'll have to wait and see. I'll be back in a few days for more copies. Goodbye, Henry, she said, leaving. Have a nice day, Mrs. Tanner. Henry went out, picked up the empty display, and placed it in the back room. He replaced it with one for a new novel by Jeffrey Archer. A few minutes later, the owner came back. What happened to the display of The Empire of Flies? Sold out. Don't tell me, Mrs. Tanner. Yep. I'll call the distributor and tell him to send a rush delivery. Henry was going about his duties when he heard someone enter the shop. It was Elizabeth. Hey, Dorkface, how are you doing? She asked. Hello, Boogerface, I'm fine, thank you, Henry replied in good humor. Henry had known Elizabeth from the time they were in kindergarten. They were best friends. They went to the same grade school and even the same high school. They only parted when she went to one university and he went to another. What are you doing for lunch? She asked. Eating, he answered. Funny, ha. How about I buy you lunch? What's the occasion? I got a raise. Wait, come to think of it, everybody in my department got a raise, so I thought I'd celebrate with my best buddy. All right, give me 5 minutes. They walked along the street and stopped outside a fast food restaurant. Burgers and fries? Henry asked, raising his eyebrows. I only got a raise. I didn't win the lottery, wise guy, Elizabeth replied. Henry smiled. Burgers and fries are fine by me. Inside, they were chewing their lunch when Elizabeth said, I spoke to your mom this morning. I heard, Henry said, not happy. Stop trying to make my life difficult. Not my fault. I called, and your mom answered. She asked me how I was doing and what I was doing. Then she asked me if there were any positions open in my firm. What did you say? I said, yeah, there is a position open. I had to tell her the truth. Lie to her, Henry said. I'm not going to lie to her. Why not? That's so stupid, Henry. You mean to tell me to lie to your mom? If it makes my life less complicated, he said. Less complicated? You work for a bookstore. How complicated can your life get? No, wait. I'm sorry. Maybe the books come alive and they start attacking you. They do. I got bit by Stephen King just last week. That's not funny. She eased up a little and then said, You know your mom wants the best for you. So do I. Why don't you tell her the truth? Tell her what? Tell her you work at the bookstore because one day you want to be a writer. Yeah, right. Why not? Isn't that why you work there? Yeah. So tell her, Elizabeth insisted. You love books, and one day you want to write your own. It's not that simple, Henry said, shaking his head. Why not? My mom wasn't too thrilled with me going to college, especially taking English literature. She dreamed I would become a doctor, lawyer, even an accountant, somewhere I would make good money and have some respect. You will have that, she said, holding his hand, when you become a successful writer. I know, he said. They ate their lunch in silence. Henry suddenly said, No. What? Elizabeth said. Don't look up, just stare at the table. Elizabeth did exactly what Henry said, but then asked, Why? They're coming this way. Who? A guy I knew from college, he said, but then he made a fake smile and waved. A man waved back, and, accompanied by a woman, came in. Henry? Henry Watman? I knew I recognized you, the man said, coming near them. Hello, Andre, Henry replied, trying hard to hide his unhappiness. This is Leslie, Andre said, introducing the woman. Hi, she said. This is Elizabeth, Henry said, reluctantly. Elizabeth smiled back. Hi. Do you mind? Andre asked. Elizabeth got up and sat beside Henry, while Andre and Leslie sat opposite of them. Andre Spencer was someone Henry hated. Andre's wavy hair was messy and pushed backward. He was unusually shaven and wore clothes that were wrinkled. To Henry, Andre was trying to imitate Mordecai Richler, and he was doing a poor job of it. Do you mind? Andre asked, holding a cigarette in front of Elizabeth. No, go ahead, she replied. Andre didn't bother asking Henry's opinion. He lit the cigarette. Leslie, on the other hand, was pretty and neatly dressed. She also seemed intelligent. To Henry, it was a mystery why beautiful and intelligent women found Andre attractive. He was an arrogant, self-centered wannabe. "So, Henry," Andre said, taking a puff, "what are you up to?" "Nothing much," Henry replied, trying hard not to start a conversation. "You want to know what I was up to?" Andre said. "No," Henry wanted to say. "I don't care what you're up to." "I'll tell you," Andre said without waiting for the answer. "My short story has just been nominated for CAA Jubilee Award for Short Story." "Isn't that great?" Leslie said with a wide smile. "Great," Henry whispered. "Congratulations," Elizabeth said. "Thank you," Andre answered with another puff of his cigarette. "You're a writer?" Elizabeth asked innocently. "No," thought Henry. "Don't start." Andre's eyebrows rose. "You've never heard of me?" "No, not really," she replied. "I was recently on the cover of Future magazine. There was a full 2-page article on me." Leslie interrupted. "He was voted as one of the 10 people who will have an influence in the Canadian culture in this new millennium." "Really?" Elizabeth said. "Henry never mentioned you." "I've been busy," Henry said. "Doesn't matter," Andre puffed. "In a few years, the entire country will know me." "Yes," Leslie giggled. "He could be the next Michael Ondaatje." "I saw The English Patient, and I loved it," Elizabeth said. Leslie turned to Andre. "Maybe they might make a movie from one of your stories." "Of course they will," Andre answered. "They'll be stupid not to. Go get me something to drink." She obediently got up and left. Henry could tell that Andre had her in his spell. From the very first day Henry met him, he realized women liked Andre because they thought he was exceptional. Henry couldn't see anything exceptional about him. Leslie returned with the drink. "Coke," Andre spat. "You know I like diet." "Don't worry, I'll get you another one," Leslie said, a little embarrassed. She went back and brought him his drink. She sat down and spoke as if nothing had happened. "What do you do, Henry?" "I work for a bookstore," he answered politely. "Must be fun to have all those wonderful books at your fingertips." "That's why I work there." "What are the best sellers?" "Most by known writers, and particularly the new one, The Empire of Flies, by H.W. Greaves." "I love that book," Leslie said. "I've read it twice. It's a brilliant book." "I love how the author compares flies to humans and an empire to a country. It's so deep." Andre interrupted. "It's not bad." "You read it?" Henry asked, surprised. Leslie answered, "I made him read it." "I could have done better," Andre retorted. "It is a wonderful book," Elizabeth said. "Henry gave it to me." Leslie turned to Henry. "You work in the book industry? Is there a second book coming out?" "I don't see why not," Henry replied. "Usually after the success of a first one, a second follows. From what I've heard, it should be out in a few months." "I can't wait for it," Leslie said. "You'll have to hold a copy for me." Elizabeth turned to Henry. "You should write something like that." "You're a writer?" Leslie asked, surprised. Henry shook his head. Elizabeth stepped in. "He's written some short stories, but he hasn't sent them to a publisher." "Why not?" Leslie asked. "They're not that good," Henry replied. "Oh, don't be silly," Leslie said. "Andre can have a look at them. He could help you get them published if you like." Meanwhile, Andre was getting impatient. No one paying any attention to him made him feel uncomfortable. "We better go," Andre said. "I have to finish my manuscript." "You're writing a novel?" Elizabeth asked. Leslie stepped in. "Yes, he is. Come next year, it'll be the most talked about book in the country." "Wow," Elizabeth said. "Good luck." Andre got up and left without saying a word. Leslie said goodbye and obediently followed behind. After lunch, they were out on the street. Elizabeth said, "Your friend Andre is not very modest." "Not my friend," Henry said with disgust. "But Leslie was nice, though," Elizabeth said. "I can't understand why she's with that jerk." "She won't be for long," Henry said. "Once she realizes he's a wannabe writer, she'll dump him like the rest of them. Anyways, I had a nice lunch." Elizabeth gave him a hug. "Say hi to your mom for me." "I will," Henry said. Just as he entered the shop, Henry knew from the look on the owner's face that he was late. "Once, Henry. Just once," the owner said. "Next time I'll be on time," Henry said. "I promise." "I've been waiting for you for almost 20 minutes, the owner said. "We got the shipment of the Empire of Flies." "That fast?" "They sent it express. Put it outside so we can get rid of it." Using a blade, Henry opened the boxes and removed the newly printed copies of the Empire of Flies. He pressed his hand over the cover and felt the protruding font. Hopefully, one day, his name would be on a copy just like this. Within minutes, the copies of the Empire of Flies were outside the shop, ready to be purchased. In the evening, around closing time, Henry brought the displays back inside and shut the front door. He flipped the sign from open to closed. Meanwhile, the owner removed the day's sales from the cash register. He would spend the rest of the evening comparing the daily sales receipts with the cash on hand. Henry swept the floors, organized the books, and then went to the back of the shop to where the owner's small office was. Henry was holding a book in his hand. He knocked on the door and found the owner deeply immersed in the receipts. "I'm done," Henry said. The owner did not look up. He was entering numbers into a calculator. "I'm going to take a copy," Henry said, holding up a book. The owner still did not look up, but said, "Remind me on payday." "See you tomorrow," Henry said. The owner allowed Henry to purchase any book he wanted at half the retail price, sometimes even at wholesale price if the book was a non-seller. Henry placed the book in his bag and walked out. Henry did not go home. He walked east, then north, and finally stopped at a large chain bookstore. The store was closed, but a man wearing the store's uniform stood beside the front doors. "I'm here for the reading," Henry said. "Go up," the man said. On the second floor, a woman greeted him. "We'll start in 10 minutes, she said. "You can purchase a copy over there." Henry nodded and went in that direction. Without looking suspicious, Henry pulled out the copy from his bag and went to the corner where the reading would take place. The lights were dimmed. A chair was placed in front with others neatly around it. He sat in the back and began skimming through the book in his hand. He had not read it yet, but would eventually do so. He was here for one reason and one reason only. He wanted to see a book reading firsthand. He had never been before bothered to see one, but if one day he was to be a writer, he must see how others did it. A smile involuntarily crossed his face when he thought of his shop's owner. The owner would not be pleased if he found out Henry was here. Book Palace was a small shop, and most authors preferred large bookstores, such as the one he was in right now. Henry felt someone sit beside him on his right. It was a man. The man smiled and said, "You finished it?" "No, actually, I'm just beginning," Henry said. "What are your favorite books of his?" the man asked. Henry named a few. He had read the author's bio in the jacket of the current book. Except for that, he knew nothing about the author. Henry hoped the man would ask no more. After a few minutes, the lady who had greeted Henry came and stood in front of the 30 or so people seated around the main chair. She thanked them for coming and then introduced the author. There was gentle clapping, which was followed by the author's entrance. He looked to be in his early 50s, slim with very sharp features. The author sat on the main chair and began talking about his latest book. He read excerpts from the book and then began answering questions. "When did you decide to become a writer? From where did you get the inspiration for the book? Are you working on another?" Henry wanted to ask a question but decided against it. It was a personal question, and he did not want to share the answer with everyone else. In the end, everyone got up and slowly began gathering around the author. He thanked them for coming, spoke to them individually, and signed their copies. Meanwhile, light snacks and drinks were placed for the audience. Henry allowed himself for some snacks and then moved around the store. He went to the front of the store. He felt someone move past him. It was the woman who had greeted him when he arrived. He asked her why she didn't have a copy of The Empire of Flies in the front. "We have it in the back," she replied. "Why?" "As you may have read, it's an instant seller. When customers come in to acquire a copy, they move around and end up purchasing some of our not-so-fast-selling titles." "I see," Henry said with admiration. This was something he would mention to the shop's owner. Curiosity tugging away at him, Henry asked, Will the author of The Empire of Flies come for a reading? Yes, of course he will. I've spoken to the author's publicist, and our store will be on the author's reading list, the woman replied. Is that so? Henry couldn't help but smile. That would be great. She excused herself and went away. Henry looked up at the massive bookstore with all its treasures and smiled. He loved it, and he was happy he was a part of it. With a handful of people left, Henry made his way back toward the author. He stood behind a lady who could not stop praising the author. Once Henry's turn came, he introduced himself and gave the author his copy to sign. Henry finally asked the question he had wanted to ask the entire night. I've written a novel, and I don't know what to do. The author carefully examined Henry. He had such caring eyes. How old are you? The author asked. 22. Wait, the author answered. Wait? Henry asked, unsure. Wait until you're older, the author said. The problem with this society is no one wants to read a bestseller by a 22-year-old. I have no doubt you've written a good book, maybe even a great book, but to get the recognition you deserve, wait until you're older. Henry felt as if someone had hit him with a sledgehammer. He was hoping it was time to show the world who he really was. The author handed Henry his copy back and shook his hand. Good luck, he said. Remember, persistence is the key to this profession. The ride on the bus back home was miserable. The reply from the author was devastating. It was unexpected. Henry closed his eyes and thought hard about the reply. The reply did make sense. Henry had not seen a book on the bestseller list, which was written by someone his age. Henry's eyes fell on the book in his hand. He opened the front cover and saw what was written in black ink. To Henry, a fellow writer, I hope you enjoy reading this book as much as I've enjoyed writing it. Signed, the author. To be considered a fellow writer brought a smile to Henry's face. Henry entered his home and went straight to the basement. He unlocked the basement door with a key only he had. He allowed no one into the basement, not even his mom. The basement was where he did his magic, a place for himself and the worlds he created. He turned the lights on and went down the old steps. The basement was empty except for a corner where a desk, a chair, and a computer sat. He turned on a small fluorescent desk lamp and sat behind the chair. He turned on the computer and waited. He thought about what the author had said earlier and placed the signed copy to one side. He then cleared his mind and began typing. 3 hours later, when Henry had typed the final words, he sat back. He was finished. His manuscript was ready for publication. He printed the last chapter and placed it with the others. He then began typing the cover page. Under the title, he wrote the name Henry Whatman, but then decided against it. When finished, he printed the cover page and placed it on top of his second manuscript. It read as follows: The City of Flies by H.W. Greaves. This has been 10 Typewriter Tales, a collection of stories, written by Thomas Fincham, narrated by John William Cantees. Copyright 2021 by Thomas Fincham. Production copyright by Thomas Fincham.